Good morning, everybody. This is an exciting day. This is day one of the 4th Annual Natural Gas Symposium, hosted by the Energy Institute at Colorado State University. We're so glad you're here. Let me introduce our welcoming CSU person, Chancellor Michael Martin. It's my pleasure to introduce the Chief Executive Officer of the whole 3-campus system. He's responsible for working with the Board of Governors to lead the system's operations, to set legislative strategy, and to serve as the primary spokesman for CSU. He has served 4 years at Louisiana State University. He was president of the New Mexico State University, and as vice president for agriculture and natural resources at University of Florida. He is really nationally recognized as a strong voice for higher education. So please help me give a warm welcome to Chancellor Martin.
Well, thank you, Maury, and welcome to everyone. It's a delight to be here. Every time someone reads off that list of where I've been, I feel like I can't hold a job. But this is a job I'm enjoying holding for a lot of reasons, not the least of which is why we're here today. This is an enormously important topic, as you all know. Probably among the most controversial but most vital things we're going to talk about in this society, in this country, and globally for several years to come. And I'm proud that CSU and our Energy Institute has taken the leadership in opening up a dialogue that's based on sound science, reasonable conversations to help us advance this agenda. So it's a delight to have you all here. And at least for me, this is what great universities are intended to do, and we're doing it today, and your participation is absolutely vital. So thank you all for being here. Welcome on behalf of all of us at CSU, and thank you for participating. We're going to keep moving crisply, and I want to introduce one of our sponsors and let Frank say a few words. This is Frank Muscara from Wells Fargo, as was already mentioned. Frank is Executive Vice President and head of the Power and Utilities Group within the Wells Fargo system. This energy group, in this particular group, works with the energy industry across the board. He's located here in Denver. He has a long history of service to this industry. He joined Wells Fargo in 2002, but prior to that he spent 18 years with Bank of America. He's worked not only with the energy industry, but with real estate and chemicals and a variety of other industries that relate to what we do here. Frank has been a strong supporter of this program, and his company and his bank have been instrumental in making us the institution and the programs we want to serve for this area and for the nation. As an academic, we always have to look at their academic background, and Frank is a graduate of 3 great universities. University of Southern California, where he got his bachelor's degree, University of Houston, where he got an MBA, and University of Indiana, where he got a master's degree, and I love this, in strategic management. So please join me in welcoming and thanking Wells Fargo and Frank Muscara.
Thank you, Chancellor Martin. Good morning. How's everybody doing? On behalf of Wells Fargo, I'd also like to extend our welcome to everyone. At Wells Fargo, much of what drives us day to day is doing our part to build strong communities across the United States. To us, this involves helping individuals, small businesses, and large corporations make their visions of success into realities. I think looking at the conference agenda, we will hear about a lot of visions at this conference. Many of them will look forward to reliable and diverse sources of power. Others will be talking about improving air quality or water quality. Still others will have visions of community engagement or new creative public policy. Then sometime in the process, whether it's today, the next day, a week after that, a following month, you or a team of you will put these visions together and will create an environment for communities to thrive, not only in Colorado, but across the country. Now, visions need capital. As one of the largest capital providers to the energy industry, we see a growing need to finance and support entrepreneurs and companies focused on innovative energy solutions. Each day, and literally every day, Wells Fargo bankers from the energy group, environmental finance, and clean tech advise their clients as the clients try to identify new sources of oil and gas, new sources of power like solar and wind, and new ways to store energy. Since 2005, Wells Fargo has provided more than $28 billion in environmental finance. We support sustainable buildings and renewable energy projects nationwide. We will continue to support. We are absolutely committed to this effort. We have committed to, provide $30 billion. Yeah, maybe I was choked up over that number. $30 billion to environmentally sustainable businesses by 2020. We also have more than $40 billion currently in loan commitments to public and private companies across the energy value chain, from exploration and production companies all the way to the light switch. Now, when our company was founded 162 years ago, whale oil still powered lamps, and horsepower meant just that, horsepower. This should be a reminder to all of us that our best ideas for reliable, sustainable, and clean energy sources lie ahead. Natural gas is a crucial part of both our present and future energy effort. CSU is an institution that's at the forefront of both the conversation and the action surrounding the natural gas industry. We at Wells Fargo are proud to be a part of this conversation, and more importantly, we are ready to support the ideas that come from this symposium. Thank you very much.
Thanks again, Frank. And just as an observation, as a relatively new member, a couple of years now here in Denver, I have never experienced a place where the corporate citizenry is as large and as proactive as it is here. And it says something both about the community and about the things that the corporate citizens care about. And so thank you, and thanks again to Wells Fargo. Now it's a pleasure for me to introduce a colleague and a former governor and the leader of one of our emerging programs, the Center for the New Energy Economy at CSU. And you all know Bill Ritter, so he probably doesn't need an introduction. But let me say this. This is the third university that I've worked at where we've taken in a former politician. And in the other two instances, it was more ceremonial than substantive. And I will say here, this is a substantive addition to our cadre of leaders. I've been enormously impressed with what Bill Ritter has done on the energy front, and to put CSU in Colorado on the center stage of the conversation about the future of energy in this country and in this world. And that is a wonderful testament to a man who has devoted a huge part of his life to public service. We're proud of the fact that he's a graduate of CSU, and we're somewhat proud of the fact that he's a graduate of CU. No, we are proud of you for both of those reasons, Bill. But this has been a remarkable revelation to me, that we could get someone of his substance and his character to take on a challenge that is critical, as we've discussed already, and do it in the way, the balanced and energetic way he's done it. So with this, let me turn this panel and the rest of this conversation over to the 41st governor of Colorado, but the very first director of the Center for the New Energy Economy, Bill Ritter.
Thank you. Thank you, Chancellor Martin, for being here, for being a part of our conference, and for helping us open it up. Frank, thanks for your remarks and for Wells Fargo's sponsorship. So I'm going to frame this a little bit. Last year we had a fantastic conference. We actually were in a different venue in Fort Collins, at the CSU campus, or just adjacent to it. And then this year we decided we'd move the venue to Denver, and also expanded the steering committee to include people from outside of CSU. This is the 4th year we've done this conference. To date, the steering committee members have all sort of been at CSU and somehow involved in natural gas or natural resources as a part of natural gas development conversation. So we decided to expand it. And we had among our steering committee a group of people that represented a variety of different stakeholder groups involved in this conversation of oil and gas development, and not just in Colorado, but nationally. And so we had people from the industry who provided the industry perspective. We had regulators providing sort of the government/regulation perspective, people from the environmental community, and people from the academic community. We sat down and we said, what should we do that might be different than what we've done before? And one of the things suggested to us by the stakeholder group is to try and understand natural gas in the context of where we've been, where we are, and where we're going, so that we don't think of this as a static conversation, but really as a dynamic one, and maybe providing some context about where we've been and what things we've done to improve upon what once was happening, those places that are still significant issues, what are the potentials, what's the potential for us, what are the risks, what are the benefits, and to really frame it as a vector. And that came from our steering committee that was a pretty diverse group. So we set up the conference that way, and you'll see how we've lined it out really is about that vectoring. We also prepared a white paper that the speakers have seen, that you will hear about from Dr. Ken Carlson in a moment, and that is really something that our speakers can look at, reflect upon. We're going to listen to the dialogue that happens here, improve upon that white paper, and then sort of submit it as the state of natural gas production in Colorado, and really giving us some flavor for what's happening nationally as well. So that's the setup. That's kind of how we thought about this conference, and why you'll see panels that deal with a variety of different subjects, some that are about technology or policy, but also about the conversation between communities and industry, the issue of public health and where we're at, both in what we know and what we don't know, looking at black swans, what are the disruptive technologies that are out there, what's the international market for natural gas, and what role does Colorado and what role do we and the nation play in the international market? So that's, like I think Mari said, there's 10 different sessions, and really we tried to represent what the steering committee thought would really give people a flavor of this vectoring from where we've come, where we are, and hopefully where we're going. So the primary author of the white paper, with some help from some other folks, is Dr. Ken Carlson. He's been a part of developing our work in natural gas for a very long time at Colorado State University because of his expertise in water. And Dr. Carlson is going to spend about, I think, 15 minutes or so talking about sort of the white paper and his development of it. And then we as a panel are going to discuss, or I'm not on the panel, I guess I as the moderator of this panel will discuss this. I'll introduce the panel after Dr. Carlson's remarks, but I'd ask you to welcome to the stage Dr. Ken Carlson. He is the director of the Center for the, Director for the Center for Energy, Water Sustainability. He's a civil and environmental engineer, and he's also part of the Energy Institute, where I am located, where there's a variety of us here that are located. And Dr. Carlson is one of the premier water researchers in the field of natural gas development in the nation, and certainly in Colorado. We're happy to have you, and please give him a warm welcome.
Thank you. Thank you, Bill. Thank you for the introduction. Thank you for being here. We titled this, The State of Oil and Gas Development in Colorado, A Pathway to Energy and the Industry Community Sustainability. And like Bill said, it came out of discussions with the steering committee internally What I would say about that, that's a pretty broad directive, is to provide the state of the oil and gas development. We're really focused on what that says, is the industry community sustainability issues. And it really does come down to risks and benefits, like Bill said. CSU is strong in these things. We don't do as much downhole research. One of our premises is that the downhole researchers and producers of oil and gas are doing pretty well, which is one of the reasons we're here. And we don't need to focus on that as much, at least here. The other point I'd like to make is that what we're going to talk about over the next 2 days, we're saying it's focused on Colorado because that's what we know best, many of us. But many of the concepts, many of the information, the discussion applies certainly nationally and eventually maybe internationally. So we would like to look at it in that context. So why are we even here? Why are we even trying to move towards industry community sustainability? There are lots of projections of fossil fuel, renewable energy use in the future. This is just one. This is EIA, the Energy Information Administration, nonpartisan federal government group, 2014 projections. And I'm not going to get into the details here, but any way they look at it, various scenarios have the three primary fossil fuels as still significant fuel sources out to 2040. And so you could look at this various ways. One way you might say is that fossil fuels are with us in some capacity. Many of us believe that there needs to be transitions away from them, and this plot actually shows that, a transition to a stronger portfolio of renewable, but it doesn't go away in that time frame. So more locally, these are some of the projections for Colorado. And, well, actually, this is the historical data provided by the Leeds School of Business, CU Boulder. We can look at this in various ways, and they have. In other words, how does this impact, how does the oil and gas industry impact the state of Colorado? And it is significant in terms of jobs, severance taxes, economic activity, et cetera. So that's on one side. That's, let's say, the benefit side. And then on the other side, which is a big part of this, is the risks. If there were all benefits and no risks, we wouldn't be here. If there were all risks and no benefits, for example, what I'm showing, we wouldn't be here. We wouldn't be doing this, right? But there does seem to be a significant amount of both. And so that's what we're trying to do. That's what we tried to explore, some concepts with our white paper that we shared with the speakers in the steering committee. And to follow on with what Bill said, we will assimilate the information from this symposium. We will finalize the white paper with that title, and then we will make it available likely by the end of October. So speaking of sustainability, which is what I think is a big theme of this, we've developed this idea of, or maybe we're utilizing this idea of a sustainability prism. In other words, what the light we're looking for is acceptable oil and gas development. Using this analogy, you could say that consists through some sort of sustainability prism of various colors. And I've identified 5 potential colors here, and that is just for example. This is the exercise that the state, communities, industry, all stakeholders need to go through. And what are these colors that make up what I would say is acceptable oil and gas development in Colorado and then potentially beyond? So we can get to this point. That's why I showed the benefits first. We can get to this point by saying that there are a lot of reasons we want to do this, and that is the economic activity, jobs, et cetera. So some of the things that could make up this prism are clean air, clean water. I don't think there's much disagreement about that. It's just what does that mean and how do we get there? Safety, safe. I don't think anybody disagrees about that. Again, what does it mean? How do we get there? But one of the points we make is that this is really a two-way street. Sustainability isn't just requiring industry to provide clean air, clean water, health, et cetera, but there's also, to make this truly sustainable, there has to be, for example, one of the points there was regulations, stable and transparent regulations. There has to be acceptable rates of return. And so that's the way we're trying to make this prism balanced, is yes, there are lots of community concerns. Those need to be addressed. They have to be, if we're truly going to make this sustainable, two ways, industry, community, we have to take into account that there has to be an acceptable rate of return. And one of the things industry seems to be concerned about is a moving target with respect to regulations. So, but again, I'm not trying to say this is the right set of colors that would be part of a prism. So what Bill was saying about the trajectory, we have and will continue to try to frame where we've been and how far we've actually come. If you were to drop into Colorado today, you would think, maybe not today, because things have gotten a little better, but maybe in July, which there was a fair amount of tension. You would think, boy, Colorado, you haven't done anything. The communities are banning fracking, industries putting together these constitutional amendments, there's a lot of protests, et cetera. But that actually isn't the truth. There's been a lot of progress in terms of rules, in terms of providing best practices. Starting maybe in 2007 with the reconstitution of the Oil and Gas Commission, done under some administration that I don't remember, but it'll come to me. But really things started around that time frame, stricter casing integrity, wellbore integrity rules. So what we're trying to show in this graphic is that there are actually a lot of pieces. This recently enacted methane monitoring rule is a first of its kind in the country. And maybe by itself, it isn't going to get us where we need to go, but it is a really significant piece of this overall puzzle. The groundwater monitoring rule that went into effect last year, the hydraulic fracturing fluid disclosure rule. I think you would get a lot of debate about each of them, and they're not perfect, but there are a lot of pieces here already, and what I'm trying to say with the present here is that we are convening, and this is maybe the role of the task force that Governor Hickenlooper has put together, a task force to figure out how these pieces go together and get us to a space of sustainability. To expand on that a bit, which is, where we're at now, and you can characterize that in various ways. And I put up a few words here that I'm probably not going to say, but I think different people would characterize where we're at differently. But the point is, most people would say we're not in an acceptable, sustainable space. And so how are we going to get, so if we assume that oil and gas is going to be with us for a few decades as a globe, there are lots of benefits to Colorado, and we're driven to get to this acceptable space, how are we going to do that? What we're trying to get across here is that the pieces, the colors of the sustainability prism might be a key to that. In other words, we need to find a path that addresses each of those. So what tools do we have to actually do that? That's where the symposium comes in. We've identified 4 primary tools for going from where we are now, building on the past, and to where we need to be. Technology, of course, is one of those. Technology has gotten us to where we're at with respect to shale gas, tight oil, et cetera. Technology can do lots of good things, but technology by itself is not going to get us, we believe, from where we're at to where we need to be. Policy, like I said, policy has, I believe, been out in front in the state of Colorado. Policy is going to play a key role in the future. Two of the final panels today will talk about that. The fourth one I have up there is communication. You could argue that some of these issues are communication, and there might or might not be substance. Sometimes we don't even know because we're arguing on different planes. And I think that the next session will talk about how we communicate better as different stakeholder groups. And then economics. I think economics is a tool because if we can come up with win-win solutions, those will drive themselves. And I don't really need to say much more about that, but methane capture, for example, fixing methane leaks in the distribution system or collection systems is over the long term a win-win. And the more of those, recycling water, which minimizes risks, is if it's done right, and there's lots of people, including us, still working on how to do that right and cost effectively, could be a win-win. So economics is going to be important. Talking about risks, we get more deeply into how we're going to deal with this. And one of the frameworks that we've thought about over the years, actually, is these first two parts of risk mitigation are done pretty well, I believe. I believe by industry and by government, the Oil and Gas Commission, CDPHE, are done pretty well. In other words, identify the risk, characterize the risk, understand the impact, and then respond by either implementing best practices, regulating best practices. That has actually happened a lot, and I'm not going to go into that now. There's no time, but industry has put in a lot of best practices, some responding to regulations, some not. But there still seems to be this gap between community and industry. So one of the things we wonder is maybe this loop isn't closed. And closing the loop is actually some sort of monitoring and reporting, and then maybe learning. So one of the ways I say that is we need to know we've identified a risk, we've characterized the risk, let's say groundwater contamination, we've put in place containment, closed loop systems, things like that. We, stakeholders, need to know that those are the right best practices that are addressing that risk. And so that's the idea of this monitoring piece. And well, I'll just go on to this then. So that third piece is monitoring, and one of the things we're going to talk about later on is our response. One of our responses, there's actually several things going on at CSU regards to monitoring and providing transparency. One of them is a real-time water monitoring system. It's a pilot scale, it's a proof of concept at this point, but will this help in the understanding of what the risks are if we provide information, a tool that can feed back information to the public? So just a few things on that. Monitoring, feedback allows continuous improvement. Transparency, I don't have to say much about that. That could be an important factor. And then risk management. If there are issues, how do they get managed? I think that's what a lot of stakeholders want, is, are you looking, most reasonable people would not expect perfection out of any industry, or really out of any person. Hopefully not me, but we would like to know that the risks are being understood and the risks are being managed, and monitoring contributes to that. So, finally, a concept about community-industry interaction. Ideally, communities and industry would communicate directly and work out any differences directly. And this happens. I mean, I know of some instances where this happens. So I would not say this doesn't. This is not the norm. The norm is to involve government, regulator, in our case, Oil and Gas Commission or Department of Public Health and Environment, And there's absolutely a role for this. One of the things we wouldn't mind hearing discussion about at the symposium is the idea of an alternative mechanism or pathway for community-industry interaction, and that could be either an academic institution, CU, CSU, School of Mines, et cetera, or an NGO like the Environmental Defense Fund, Western Resource Advocates. In other words, if there's data that needs to be collected, let's talk about monitoring data, to assure that risks are being managed and there's transparency, et cetera, is there another model besides regulating it through COGCC? Is there a model where CSU could be in the middle, where CU Boulder could be in the middle, where EDF could be in the middle? And I would argue, well, and EDF already is doing that with methane in multiple studies. And we're doing that with water. So the last thing I want to just quickly go through is this. And I made this point a lot during our steering committee, that an energy conference without a discussion of climate change just seems to me to be, you know, you're missing something big. And so I'm not going to say much about climate change here, but this isn't a local issue. It likely isn't the reason that cities banned fracking, but it just seems to me that it's always there. We can do everything else right. We can mitigate all other risks to an acceptable level, and we still have the issue of climate change. So we're hoping that there's at least some sort of discussion or interaction. We're looking for feedback. We're going to be assimilating the discussions and like we've said, make it part of the white paper. And so if you have feedback on anything you hear that you'd like us to assimilate into our process of putting together the white paper, and I say this with a little bit of nervousness, you can email me through that app, or Maury. Dobie, D-O-B-B-I-E. But really, we really do want feedback. That was the whole purpose of this. It's a little different than we've done in the past. And I think with that, I will turn it back to Bill.
Thank you, Ken. So if you look at the panels, we've really made an attempt to have diverse stakeholder perspectives on the panels. And this is no exception. It's sort of what we consider our role at CSU is to be an honest broker of the conversation, and a conversation that can oftentimes be contentious or divisive. And we like to bring people together that can have a different kind of conversation, represent the viewpoint of their stakeholder group, but still be able to listen to other people with a perhaps different perspective on stage and engage in a pretty civil dialogue that hopefully gets us to a place where we can offer some constructive paths forward. So we've done that again today. The bios are all there and available for you. I'll talk about just the titles as I introduce the panel, but I'm not going to do lengthy introductions. We're going to get right to the meat of the matter. Chris Wright is the CEO of Liberty Resources. He can tell you a little bit about his company, but he's going to offer an industry perspective in some respects. Hassan Dandashli is a VP of a Vice President of Downstream Technology Solutions, Oil and Gas for General Electric. Paula Gant is the Deputy Assistant Secretary of the Office of Oil and Natural Gas. I think this is a repeat performance for Paula. She was with the American Gas Association when she attended our previous conferences, and so now she's at the Department of Energy. And Dan Grossman is the Regional Director of the Rocky Mountain Office of the Environmental Defense Fund. So we're going to have a conversation, and we're going to ask each of them to give a perspective sort of at the beginning, where we'll take a few minutes, and then hopefully it'll be more conversational, but really just a few minutes. And Chris, I'm going to start with you. You heard Ken's presentation sort of about past, present, future. From an industry perspective, I want you to just kind of talk about what it's been like for the last 10 years, and really talk a little bit about this resource from both a Colorado and a national perspective. How big is the gas resource, the tight oil resource, and what difference, what do things that people in the industry, what do they focus on to try and understand where we're going with this resource in America?
Great. Thanks, and glad to be here. And I really enjoyed Ken's overview of the white paper. So quick background, I'm a kid, I grew up a few miles from here, and I went to college to study plasma physics to work on fusion energy. After that, I worked on solar energy, geothermal energy, and energy conversion efficiency. So if you'd ask me young, would I be on a panel talking about oil and gas? I would say absolutely not. So by a blind squirrel finds nut story, I'm involved in the shale revolution from the start in the late 90s. And really the way to think of it is, two innovations allowed us to put denser network of hydraulic fractures, contact area between the well and the rocks. I brought a core of shale and then forgot it. I must have left it in my car. But if you look at this, you can't imagine stuff flowing through it. So the only way we get oil and gas out of it is by making these large networks of hydraulic fractures. Traditionally, fracturing 65 years old. 20 years ago, you could get 10,000 to 100,000 square feet of contact area. The shale revolution, the innovations of the late 90s, moved that to 1 to 10 million. So it's 2 orders of magnitude increase in contact area. This allowed production from the source rocks. Traditional oil and gas is, when oil and gas is created in shale, and it's created there because they're impermeable rocks, so they prevented oxygen, they prevented normal decomposition. So as oil and gas gets generated, tiny natural hydraulic fractures created by Mother Nature eventually link up and allow it to seep out. It floats upward because it's buoyant, it gets trapped somewhere. Conventional oil and gas production is finding those traps for the stuff that's seeped out. The change now is going straight to the source rock, not waiting for Mother Nature to seep it out, bring our own plumbing network, which are also hydraulic fractures, and connect them back to a wellbore. And in the late 90s, we had no idea how big this would be. And to put some quick numbers on it, of course it led to a surging of natural gas production. We passed Russia 3 years ago as the largest natural gas producer in the world. 10 years ago, when we were working on this stuff, we were spending tens of billions of dollars to build natural gas import terminals. Now we're quickly permitting and licensing them as export terminals. US oil imports went from 60% in 2005 to 30% today, 20% next year. So it's really rocked our world, and we talk too much about what it's mean to the oil and gas industry. Really, the real impacts are to everybody outside of the oil and gas industry. Some of them are adverse, these community impacts of trucks and activity, which is a big issue to discuss. The real environmental issues is the same as conventional production, which is casings and cement integrity. Produced water disposal, biggest one to me by far is community impacts and neighbors and all that. But I think the big issue going forward is what it means for the country of just cheap gas. There's $100 billion of construction right now just to use ethane. It's a byproduct of the production of methane gas. So it's causing a huge reshoring of manufacturing here. In fact, I've been involved in that. So in any case, when these things happened in the 90s, we had no idea where it was going. We can, in the panel, discuss a little bit about where we think it might go, but we're probably going to be wrong there too.
That's fantastic, and thanks for the perspective. Hassan, General Electric has made a big bet on natural gas. I was on a panel with your CEO, Jeff Immelt, when I was governor, and we were at Notre Dame, and we were talking a lot about energy, and natural gas was part of the discussion, but I think not as big a part of the discussion as it would be today if Jeff Immelt, who actually was on a panel here last year. So talk about this from General Electric's perspective, both the potential, some of the things that Chris alluded to, but the things that you're doing as well on the technical side that are about some of the risk management that Ken alluded to.
Thanks, Bill. And, and I think I was in the audience when you were with Jeff. And Jeff always talks about, GE, we are a technology infrastructure company. So he talks about 3 drivers that impact the world economy and that impact the industrial world. The first one he talks about is the age of gas, and then he talks about the industrial internet, and then he talks about advanced manufacturing. So we'll look at these as 3 major themes driving where the economy is going. When we look at the, why we termed it the age of gas, and we have gone very, very public and very open about it, the energy demand in the world continues to rise. It's rising at 2% a year, and 75% of that increase is happening in emerging markets. Oil is expensive, and there is also the carbon emissions that come from it. Coal has its environmental impact. And when you look at gas today, you find that because of the technology that we just heard about, there's an abundance of gas that's coming from shale resources. And globally, there's other gas finds that are happening in the East Med, in Mozambique, and other places. And technology is allowing the development of shale resources and also allowing the ability to utilize what we used to call before stranded gas. So when you look at all of these things coming together and the impact it could have on the world economy, it becomes a major driver for us as a company and for all the other peers that we work with. So we look at gas driving a number of economies, and you just heard, there's a huge increase in investments in the petrochemical industry in North America, with about 65% of that investment coming from outside North America into North America to invest into petrochemical plants, and it's all coming here because of the cheap feedstock being natural gas. You look at other parts of the world, here in North America, we're blessed with a very good network for transporting the gas, and also with a very good electric distribution network. Many other parts of the world that don't have transmission grids need distributed power. They need to be able to get the gas locally, generate the electricity locally, and produce electricity to their populations. So that will play another major role globally, where gas will make a huge difference in the quality of the lives and in developing the world economy. In GE, we're active across the span. Starting from our oil and gas business, where we're active on the drilling side, we're active on the monitoring side to make sure that we're minimizing the environmental footprint of producing the oil and the gas. We're active in the water side through our water business. Active in the power generation to help replace diesel in the oil field, and also replace diesel as a power generation in general. And across the board. So as you go in it, we're producing technologies to help this industry across.
Thanks, Hassan. So Dan Grossman, this is a pretty good picture. Can impact the global economy. The expansion of the technology that helps us get it out of the ground has certainly impacted in a positive way the Colorado economy. But nationally and globally, we can see potential for that as well. You're a director of an environmental organization that's actually taken a real serious role with regard to natural gas, maybe a little bit different than other people in the environmental community. But talk about this from the perspective of a person who really has maybe a different sort of role in the development of natural gas, and really how your organization sees natural gas present and future.
Thank you. Thank you, Governor. Sorry about that. A little early for feedback like that. So it's a really good point. And the way I'd like to start is kind of pick up on Ken's framing. And that is that I think everybody needs to be clear-eyed about this. And whenever there's a transformational change in our economy, in our society, in our culture, or whatever, people tend to lose that clear-eyedness, if you will. And that's people on both sides. And so I would say, and I often tell my friends in the environmental community, that we really need to be clear-eyed about the opportunities that shale gas provides our nation. And those opportunities, yes, they're primarily economic, but there are environmental opportunities to be realized as well. Everybody in this room, I'm sure, is well aware of the climate benefits of burning natural gas as a power source compared to other dirtier fuel sources. That's an opportunity that we should try to take advantage of. On the other hand, we need to be clear-eyed about the risks as well. And as Ken pointed out, those risks are substantial, but they're not just community risks. Those community risks, they can't be overstated. They're very important and they need to be addressed. Risks to groundwater, risks just from a nuisance perspective to the people who live near these facilities. And we're seeing more and more of that here in Colorado and across the country. But there are also environmental risks associated with this great opportunity. And if we don't get this development done right, if we just allow industry to continue to do what they do now, and that is to have the full spectrum of ability to capture efficiently natural gas when they get it out of the ground and when they transport it for processing and then distribution. If we just say this is an opportunity and let's not be clear-eyed about the risks, then we're going to lose that environmental benefit. Methane as a greenhouse gas is much more powerful than carbon dioxide, especially in the short term. EDF is an organization that is committed to addressing both CO2 as a greenhouse gas and methane as a very powerful greenhouse gas. So this huge opportunity to realize the environmental benefits of burning natural gas over other power sources such as coal, we could lose that if we aren't clear-eyed about mitigating the risk of methane leaks throughout the value chain in natural gas. Now, EDF has spent a lot of time trying to figure out exactly what those risks are and how we can strategically and most effectively address them. And it's something that we do seriously and from a clear-eyed perspective, and we do it with industry, and we do it with academia. And I think that our reports, they're all peer-reviewed, and we spend a lot of time to make sure that we're right. But we don't have all the answers. We don't have them yet. And as technology develops, there will be more opportunities for us to realize even more efficiencies in the value chain for natural gas. But we do need to be clear-eyed about it, and I'm really glad that Ken chose to put that climate word on an elephant as opposed to a donkey. Coming from a donkey, and that it's climate change is a generational issue. It is one of the few defining issues of this generation. We just had 300,000 people on the streets of New York demanding that the world address climate change, an issue that isn't just some fodder for a panel to talk about here in Denver because we're engaged in a shale gas boom, but because our children are going to be faced with the consequences of the decisions that we make today. And so we just need to be very clear-eyed about both risks and opportunity.
Metaphor just isn't right? There's a donkey in the middle of the room. So, Paula, the Department of Energy, it's interesting. I gave a speech to the Denver Petroleum Club, and somebody said, listen, the President of the United States has got this war on fossil fuels. We did a project for the White House last year where I had actually conversations with the President where he was actually bullish about natural gas, but sounded a lot like Dan Grossman saying we've got to do it and get it right. I'd love you to share the perspective inside the federal government. I know you can't speak necessarily for the White House, but so let's talk about the Department of Energy. How you view natural gas, where we are presently, what's the federal role from the perspective of the Department of Energy in the development of gas and the kinds of things you're working on, either on the risk side or the potential and the benefit side?
Thanks, Governor. I appreciate the opportunity to be here, and congratulations on an incredible event. It's quite a lineup for the next 2 days. And you certainly, in this room, people have created an incredible amount of energy and momentum around the future of clean energy for Colorado that I think has really important ramifications for the country. So thank you all for being engaged in that conversation. I know it has been tumultuous at times, but it's one worth being engaged in directly, as Ken pointed out earlier. So I happily can speak for the White House in some ways because I can reiterate what the President himself is saying. And if we just look at the last 3 State of the Union speeches, the President has called out a vital role for natural gas in the future of our economy, both from an economic perspective as well as a national security and environmental quality perspective. It is a fuel that we're going to rely on for decades to come to fuel economic growth across our economy, increase standards of living for our communities, help address our goals of reducing our greenhouse gas emissions. And by producing more of it here at home, we are even indirectly making more natural gas supplies available to our trading partners and allies around the world, which not only helps in the transition away from more carbon-intensive fuels to reach our overall greenhouse gas emissions goals and address climate change, but it also contributes to their own economic and therefore their national security, which in turn enhances ours. And the recent events in Eastern Europe and Ukraine and Russia provide a very poignant example of that. while we're not sending natural gas directly to Ukraine, we have in recent years greatly reduced our dependence on imports of natural gas. In 2005, the Energy Information Administration projected that by 2013, we would be importing 9.4 billion cubic feet a day of LNG. In 2013, we actually imported a microscopic amount of LNG. So one way to think of it is that by producing more natural gas here, we have indirectly made 9.4 billion cubic feet a day of natural gas available to world markets. And that's had an incredible impact on our trading partners and allies in a very positive way. And that results from the technologies that were mentioned earlier. The combination of hydraulic fracturing and horizontal drilling, coupled with some really good economics in the early 2000s, that have led to tremendous advancements in our proven gas reserves. They're up 50%, over 50% since 2005, and that's while our production is up over 35% since 2005. This is not a story that any of us were telling in 2005, or 2008, quite frankly. This took us all by surprise. And we are still adapting to this shift in our psyche. Our psyche, and many of you in this room have heard me talk about it, the psyche about energy for our country for most of my life has been one framed by scarcity and anxiety. And now we're shifting to one framed by abundance. And I think it's important that we think about that in a clear-eyed fashion. Clear-eyed usually means you take a deep breath and you sit still and think about it. And when we have an abundance of resource, we have that opportunity to think smartly about our future and make sure we realize the full promise of that opportunity. And I want to quickly point out 3 aspects of that promise that we're focused on in the department, and hopefully we'll get a chance to talk about a little bit more later. One of them is to ensure the economic promise. We need to build on that 2.4 million miles of transmission and distribution infrastructure we have in this country, for example, that Hassan pointed out. That we're the envy of the world in that regard, but it's an infrastructure that needs to be expanded and modernized. And we're very focused on helping to make sure those investments happen. In addition, as the President called out in his State of the Union speech this last year, we need to ensure that we're making investments to create sustainable shale growth zones. And what this means is we're not just focused on minimizing the negative impact of this natural resource production, but in maximizing the positive impact to local communities by investing in infrastructure and local education, as well as workforce training and development. The second aspect of ensuring the promise is ensuring that we are thinking prudently about natural gas exports, from one example, that are an indirect means of enhancing our own national security and the security of our allies and trading partners. The Department of Energy has to date authorized the export of 3.94 billion cubic feet a day of natural gas, liquefied natural gas exports to non-free trade agreement countries. And this is having a disruptive influence on world LNG pricing mechanisms in a positive way, and in helping world consumers exercise a little bit more buying power, if you will. And those world consumers are, again, our friends and allies. Finally, with regard to fulfilling the promise, we need to ensure that we fulfill the promise presented from an environmental quality perspective. And that we are, in our office, which is really the Office of Science, if you will, where our research and development is done on unconventional oil and gas, we're focused on prudent development. And that means 2 things for us. Prudent means that we're going to get the most out of this resource. We're going to produce it, and every time we put a straw in the ground, we're going to try to get as many hydrocarbons out of the ground as we can, and therefore we're putting fewer straws in the ground, if you will. This is economists speak for all the really high-tech engineering that goes on across the country. And that we're also going to minimize the impact on, prudent means we're minimizing the impact on other natural resources, like air, land, and water. So we're very focused on understanding the potential for unconventional resource development to impact groundwater supplies, as well as to understand how we can reduce methane emissions along the natural gas value chain. And really quickly on an initiative that has stemmed from the President's Climate Action Plan, which was released summer before last. One of the aspects called for a focus on reducing methane emissions across the economy. As was noted, methane is a very potent greenhouse gas, particularly in the short term, relative to CO2. And we have a great need to focus our efforts on reducing those methane emissions across the economy. And at our office and the Department of Energy, we're focused on methane emissions from natural gas systems. The Secretary of Energy, Moniz, has convened a series of roundtables in recent months where the focus has been on reducing methane emissions downstream of production. So this is on transmission, storage, and distribution activities. And the emphasis has been on three things. One, understanding what the data tells us, and thanks to the work of the Environmental Defense Fund and industry partners, many of which who are in this room, we have better and better data to rely upon every month, and we're actively integrating that data and turning it into information and our understanding of where are we in methane emissions from natural gas systems, what is the trend, which appears to be a declining trend, and how do we accelerate that decline? And where the Secretary has been focused is understanding what are the leading practices among industry for achieving those those methane emissions reductions, and what are the technology needs so that we can further accelerate that trend. And in our office, we're focused on some of those, and hopefully we'll get a chance to talk about them later. But overall, I am absolutely thrilled to have an opportunity to work for President Obama and Secretary Moniz in supporting their efforts to, in short, finish a sentence that begins like this. We have an incredibly abundant supply of natural gas across our country. We're able to rely on it to fuel economic growth in our communities because we have a robust delivery infrastructure. And we are confident that we are going to be able to produce it and deliver it in a prudent fashion because, and that's what the work of my office is focused on. It's an incredible moment in time for the country, and I'm really honored to be able to participate. Thanks.
Thank you, Paula. So a follow-up. The President spoke yesterday in New York City to the United Nations committee and talked about climate change. It was the thrust of his remarks. And so we have that in our white paper. Dan alluded to it. So natural gas has this role to play in our climate plan as a country. You want to just talk a little bit about that?
Absolutely. It's a vital piece of it. And today we actually have a very senior level of, as an example, a very senior level delegation of Chinese government officials who are in Denver. We'll be spending the next
Downstairs.
2.5 days with them. Downstairs, yes. They're going to be going out to visit a site north of here this afternoon, and we'll have them in 2 days of meetings focused on two things. One, how can they partner with U.S. industry to produce their own natural gas shale resources and do that? What are the technologies needed? What are the commercial frameworks needed? And ensure they get it right and they get it to market because they desperately need it to address in the short term even their air quality goals, but as well as the climate goals that, are an active point of discussion between our two governments right now. As well as they're looking at how to make efficient use of that natural gas. So they're very interested in distribution infrastructure, for example, how you use natural gas in thermal and distributed applications. So not only is natural gas a clean fuel, but we need to make sure that we're using it most efficiently, and we're thinking about the infrastructure needed to get it closer to the point of use before you can convert it to thermal energy or an electron. There is not a conversation that we're in with any government around the country where we're not, around the world, where we're not talking about natural gas. And it's twofold. It's one, that they want to understand how to develop their own resources to fuel economic growth, but they're all very focused on how to do that in a prudent manner that addresses our mutual climate objectives.
So Chris, Dan was, I think, pretty frank about how his organization feels risks that are still attendant to the production. Now we've had two different folks allude to climate, or three, I guess, on the stage. I know you don't speak for the entire industry, and you're not an apologist for the entire industry, no more than Dan is for all of what's considered the environmental groups. How do you, as an industry person, though, think about this issue, both from the perspective of some frank talk about risks, but also discussions about climate as an industry person and a producer? How do you think about it?
Well, I'll speak the only way I can, which is my own views, which are actually, frankly against the views of my industry. If you look at what the shale revolution has done, and I'm a tech guy, so I got to talk numbers. Per capita CO2 emissions in the United States in 2012 were lower than any year since I was born. The dominant driver of that decrease is shale gas displacing coal. So we've been by far and away the largest reducers of CO2 emission in the world. Methane is turned the focus to now. So methane, again, you got to talk in terms of data. About 40 years ago, there was 1.7 parts per million methane in the atmosphere. Today it's 1.78 million parts per million in the atmosphere over 40 years. And the rate of rise has actually slowed since the start of the shale revolution. So is gas escape with the shale revolution? Of course. Can we do better? Yes. Is it getting better? Yes. But as a meaningful contributor to methane emissions, they've slowed the increase in atmospheric methane since the shale revolution started for two reasons. One is that today we talked about the huge growth, 35% growth. We're by far and away the largest natural gas producer. There's 340 rigs drilling for natural gas today. There was an average of 1,200 rigs drilling for natural gas from the 1990 to the early 2000s when the shale revolution took trend. So we're doing it with less than a third as many rigs. There's less than a third as many casings to leak. There's less than a third as many places to go wrong. So it should be a great story. You know, I should be a climate champion and congratulating our records there. But I actually have quite a different perspective on it. I speak on climate change quite a bit. My bigger issue outside of my family and business is poverty. And if you look at the numbers on this, people ask me, are you so proud of what the shale revolution has done? And in the US, yeah, of course I'm proud. But for a bigger reason. It's been a reducer of SOx and NOx and particulate emissions that have massive impacts in human health at a local level. But if I'm asked what the MVP of world energy is over those 15 years I've worked in the shale revolution, hands down, it's coal. Coal's been by far and away the biggest growth in world energy. Over 1 billion people have been lifted out of poverty in the last 20 years. Huge catalyst for that is the availability of electricity. 3 million people a year die from indoor air pollution, which is basically people burning dung, sticks, and grass inside of huts. When you have coal, when you have electricity, you don't do that anymore. So coal has been a huge catalyst for cleaning the environment, for lifting people up, and there's still over 1 billion people without access to electricity in the world that live on $1 a day. So the world needs more energy from all sources possible. The rich countries have an age of gas going on, which is fantastic. But the rest of the world, it's really the age of coal, and it will be for quite some time, and I applaud that.
So Hassan, turn the question back to you that's really about innovation. You talked a little bit about General Electric and innovation and sort of globally. Talk about the example that we mentioned in the white paper of innovation to really manage around risks and some of the things that you're doing in the Bakken, a famous play for tight oil development in the United States.
And I will, but first I'd like to kind of take a segue from the two people before me. Excellent points about truly bringing electricity to all these masses that are not there, and we're utilizing in GE our driving gas and the age of gas to help do that. So we're working with countries like Indonesia and in many countries in Africa to how do you take that stranded gas, or the gas that they couldn't use, liquefy it in small-scale liquefaction plants or compress it, and then move it to generate distributed power and get power to these people. So you're right on that. That revolution is going to go beyond the United States, and we're working with China on on similar things, and we're very active in China also in helping them improve the way they utilize their shared resources and also develop the network. So we call this what we call the virtual pipeline, right? Where you cannot actually build a pipeline, being able to liquefy it, move it, and then generate power or use it, that will make a huge difference. Now, something similar at a different scale that we're doing in the Bakken. So we started, we're working with a company that's actually headquartered here in Denver, Ferris, a company that specializes in what they call moving molecules in difficult terrain. We teamed up with them from our technology perspective, our compression technology, and with them, and also from our capital business, GE Ventures, working with Statoil to, in the Bakken, compress the flare gas. And in the Bakken, as many of you know, 30% of the gas that is produced is being flared, because it wasn't possible, because it's all coming as a byproduct of getting the oil. And because of the topology and the speed, the pipeline network wasn't possible to build. And North Dakota generates more light than New York City at night now. So and there's a major drive to really contain that. And what we're doing is, working with them, is we capture the flare gas, we compress it to CNG, we move it to the rigs, and then we power the rigs with it. So we started that as a pilot. Now we have extended it to all the rigs that Statoil is running, and we're working with many, many other customers to do this. And it's an excellent example that will also segue into what it takes to continue to develop this age of gas is cooperation. It takes cooperations between the technology providers, the actual producers, the communities, and bringing capital and all the different parties and regulation to come together to actually solve this problem and move it forward.
Thanks a lot. Dan, you were involved in a discussion here earlier this year that led to one of the sort of strictest methane monitoring rules in the country. You've also been critical of the water monitoring rules prior to that. And so, you know, Environmental Defense Fund is sometimes sort of trying to negotiate to a place of being settled. Is there some place that you can get to where you're saying, that's enough regulation, we've done enough here, or is it that there are still things we don't know and we don't know what's enough? I mean, do you understand the point here is there are a lot of people on the industry side that worry that regulations are a moving target and that they, you know, have some level of uncertainty, but on the other hand, there are people that I think really do believe there's no way actually that we can ever have enough regulations or enough enforcement to get it right. How do you feel about that? How does EDF feel?
It's a great question. I want to talk real briefly about one issue that was raised before I get to your question, Governor. And that
I love panelists that want to go back and think about that. Please do.
I think it's terrific that we've changed this conversation to not just include the wine and cheese crowd that we are here in Denver, Colorado, but others in the world. But I do think it's also important to remember that those who are most vulnerable to the pernicious impacts of climate change are those who live in the third world. As climate change continues to impact our lifestyle, the ski conditions in our mountains, the temperatures on our beachfront property, those are all important economic and aesthetic considerations that we should keep in mind, but we should always keep in mind that the most significant impacts will be felt in the most vulnerable countries in the world that will be the most impacted by climate change, largely created by man, by burning fossil fuels, including coal. So let me now jump to your question, which is a great one. The question for EDF and for me is never, what regulation should we pass next? For us, it is, where has the market failed? Where has the market failed to account for an externality that is hurting the environment or hurting people? And then the next question is, what could be done to change that? Could there be incentives that could be adopted? Could we do a study to indicate how important that externality is and needs to be addressed? Or is it only going to be through a statutory change or a regulatory change that will accomplish what's necessary? At EDF, we're very proud of the good relationships we have with responsible oil and gas operators across the country, both from an operational perspective as well as from kind of endeavoring to figure out what the data is and how we can actually accurately focus our time and attention to reduce environmental impacts. But oftentimes it's not enough. It's great that GE's partnership with Statoil is making a huge dent in Statoil's flaring in the Bakken, and that's tremendous. And hopefully that kind of solution will be deployed by other operators up in North Dakota. But what we saw until this year is a reluctance for any regulation on flaring in North Dakota because for fear of killing the golden goose that is the oil and gas industry up there. Since then, Lynn Helms, who's the regulator in North Dakota, convinced the Industrial Commission up there to actually put in place enforceable gas capture goals that operators are required to meet. And Statoil is going to be ahead of the curve because of their partnership with GE, and that's great. But the other operators that just didn't want to make those investments because flaring is cheaper And because we're living in the age of abundance and people aren't being clear-eyed about it, they just flare their gas. It's a huge waste, it's bad for the environment, and it's something that regulations were needed to address, and we're glad that they did that in North Dakota. Here closer to home in Colorado, again, I think when we identify a need and we identify a potential solution, I think our job as stakeholders in that process is to determine what the reasonable path is. It's not regulation for the sake of regulation. It's not regulation just to make the operations less efficient or more costly. It's regulation to achieve an environmental objective. And I will say with a lot of pride that Colorado stepped up, industry stepped up, and we got put in place the strongest methane rules in the country. Rules that we hope, and we're starting to see, will lay the foundation for other states to adopt, and hopefully the federal government to act eventually on the issue of methane from the oil and gas sector. The oil and gas sector is the largest industrial source of methane in the country, and that's something that we need to be clear-eyed about and understand very well. Our studies have shown us that by investing as little as 1 cent per MCF, industry can cut their methane emissions by 40%. That seems to be a market solution that doesn't need regulation. But what we're seeing so far is that in order to make progress on this, regulation is needed. So I hope that's responsive to your question.
It is, thanks. And so Paula, you talked about there being a national methane reduction strategy. It's actually coming out of the Department of Energy. How much do you look to what states are doing in trying to think about sort of your role, your federal role, and what that matters, how that matters in the big picture? What state like Colorado or Texas or any other states doing about methane?
Starting at sort of the beginning of things, all of these issues are local. I mean, the potential is national, the issues are local, the hydrocarbons production activities local, and state and local regulators have the leading role in ensuring that these resources are developed prudently. I mean, there's absolutely no substitute for that. And a great part of our work is done to support the activities of these state regulators and in supporting their efforts to collect meaningful data and make it available to the public, as well as to transfer the understanding that we're developing from the basic science we're conducting so that they have good, sound science upon which to make the decisions they're being called to make. With regard to methane, the strategy is actually being run out of the White House, and we're focused on, in our office, focused on that aspect of the emissions downstream of production. And I think it's important for us to think about, when we think about methane reduction along the natural gas value chain, the goal is the reduction, and there are various means for us to get there. And looking at that spectrum of solutions, from regulation to leading practices to industry leadership and continued technological advance. And there are a variety of solutions. And if we're paying attention to all of them, and we're collecting good and useful data, like is being done right now with EDF and a number of projects and many of you in this room, then we're going to have a clear-eyed sense of, are we making progress, and which are the levers that we need to push a bit harder. So if, for example, one of the areas we're focused on, as well as Brian Wilson at ARPA-E, who's somewhere in the room here today, is getting better about understanding the technologies needed to remotely assess methane leakages from natural gas systems, whether that's at production or along the delivery system, as well as measure them remotely so you know where to focus your efforts. And particularly in the distribution space, so the pipes that run through our cities and deliver natural gas to our homes and businesses, there's a lot of effort that is done to identify leaks from those systems. I mean, it's driven by our concerns for public safety, and that is the mission one of every natural gas utility in this country. Where we're looking at there is to take the data that's already being collected on those leaks. This is a big data question. And how do we turn that into information that can allow those operators to get more out of every investment dollar they're spending and every crew they send out to repair leaks, so that we're getting to greater methane emissions reductions with every bit of investment we're making? And what are the technology? And these are data technologies, right? This is actually a big data question out there. How do we turn the data that we're collecting into something that people can use to decide which crews they're going to send where every day? It's very practical. And that's some of the areas we're focused on. And that is interestingly going to be driven by, first and foremost, our desire to ensure that natural gas gets distributed safely, and that we're continuing to improve the safety and performance of those systems. And then, as a result, we're going to get an increasingly efficient and climate-friendly delivery mechanism for natural gas.
Chris, want to respond?
Great. I'm an operator. Our company is an operator. We drill wells in North Dakota in the Bakken Shale. And I got to jump in and say I agree with Dan. But I'm very proud about what's happened in North Dakota. They've gone from 39th in per capita income in 2006 to 7th in 2012. There's very large public support for our activities there. But the single biggest scar, and it's very visible if you fly over there at night, is the huge amount of gas flaring. Just under 30% of all the gas produced in the Bakken is flared. So again, the economic value is in the oil. It's 1 million barrels a day of oil, but it's 1 billion cubic feet a day of gas. And getting that gas from a wellhead into a pipe to sell it has happened much too slowly. As an operator for us, the single biggest problem is right-of-ways. We've got to lay gathering lines from all our wells and then deliver them to some line that has capacity to take it where it can be processed. To move it in a long-haul pipeline, you got to get out the natural gas liquids, so there's some processing that's involved. Major focus in our company is trying to build this infrastructure, trying to get these right-of-ways so that we can get, we're not a major flarer, but as we ramp up our production, we would be without a lot of new infrastructure. And I agree with Don. With Dan, it's been a failure in North Dakota that the state and the North Industrial Commission is on. And there are many ways to slice and attack this problem. None of them are easy. GE and Hassan have been leaders in an area there, which is fantastic. That will grow. In fact, another small Colorado company came up with an innovation on the Fischer-Tropsch process, which is a 90-year-old process to turn natural gas into a liquid fuel. They have a technology that turns natural gas into a very clean, diesel that looks like water. Now, there's capital, there's challenges there, but we are looking at this. We could potentially build a plant there to turn our natural gas into diesel right there. In any case, it's a big challenge. I agree.
If I could just add on the North Dakota perspective, the gas that is being flared in North Dakota is coming from oil production. It's not actually part of the natural gas value chain. And the work that's being done by the North Dakota Industrial Commission is world class. They are on this. The progress we've seen in the last 6 months is really impressive. The infrastructure projects are being announced, and that's a space, to your question, that I would definitely watch at the state level because incredible progress is being made in North Dakota right now.
But it's a great example of a place where you've got production that's actually ahead of risk identification. To use sort of our risk-benefit model, you're extracting the oil. There's a real benefit, an economic benefit to that, but there's a variety of risks that then need to be managed, and sometimes the management of that there's a lag time to catch up, and in that lag time, the community loses its trust, or let's say the broader community, the United States of America, that's watching the Bakken very carefully. And then it takes two things: regulation, so policy, and technology to sort of go in and get their arms around managing the risk. But it is a good way to think about sort of an issue identification. The less that lag time is between identifying the risk and acting upon it, the less sort of trust issues that develop between the communities. Hassan, you look like you want to...
No, I just wanted to follow up on what Paulo was saying regarding the methane emissions, and to let her and the audience know that we're very active in kind of what we call pipeline integrity, because we do provide solutions for compression and pipelines. We do provide solutions for pipeline inspections through the pigs that go through the pipeline. And now we're adding our data ability. So we're actually working with our customers where you collect all that data and you're able to assess what's happening across the pipeline, and also provide advice to the customer of how to go about maintaining the pipeline and what they need to do. So that's not something in the future. That's something that we're actually working on today with our customers.
I've heard people from General Electric speak fondly of regulation in the sense that they think it actually provides more innovation. So you innovate around products to answer questions around risks, and some of that is forced upon folks by regulation. Do you have that sense about that relationship, or is that sort of inside the culture of General Electric? Is that a broadly shared perspective?
It's kind of a balance of making sure that you develop enough regulations to make sure that the industry is operating safely and cleanly and everything it needs to do, but not to kind of over-hamper, just kind of overdo it too much. But yes, we do look at making sure that healthy regulations are developed so that we're able to contribute to the technology development in that space.
Trying to get to these audience questions. Chris, I think you want
No, I
to say.
was just going to say, agree. I would say the oil and gas industry, similar view. The tighter regulations in Colorado, particularly on cement and casing integrity and a number of the disclosure of flak fluids, the industry, the majority of the industry, these are great things. We get tarred. If the worst operator does something bad, it reflects in our entire industry. So, what our greatest risk to us is corner cutters and people not doing things correctly. So sensible but strict regulations on things that matter absolutely are in the best interest of our industry.
So I want to ask some audience questions, and one comes to you, Hassan. They want to know, what technology does GE employ to capture gas before it's flared if it cannot enter the pipeline?
So I think I partly answered that. So what we're doing, the example for what we're doing with the Bakken is a good one. So we capture the gas and we compress it into CNG to power the rigs. In other areas where you don't have a pipeline, we're able to also utilize what we call small-scale LNG. So these are small plants that will produce anywhere from 25,000 gallons per day to 400,000 or 500,000 gallons per day, and then you produce that LNG and then you move it in trucks in order to fuel. What we're seeing as something that's happening in the industry is to actually start replacing diesel in transportation. So that's another area we did not talk about that will create another opportunity for utilizing gas. LNG or CNG is at least 30% cheaper than diesel and will burn much cleaner. And the transportation industry, from locomotives to marine to mining to heavy-duty trucks, uses a lot of diesel. So, and that's not only in North America, that's globally, but we're starting here in North America because it'll make a lot of difference. So creating that demand will also help everything we're talking about.
Paula, question from the audience comes to you, and something we haven't talked about. Tell me if you feel comfortable answering it. It's that a federal study, not out of the Department of Energy, but out of the Department of Commerce, looked at earthquakes and seismic activity in a couple of different places, including Trinidad, Colorado, and came to the conclusion, not that it was a result of fracturing, hydraulic fracturing, but of deep well injection of processed water and fracturing fluids. What's your sense about risk management across the country with that problem?
So I'll take the opportunity to plug the work we have going on at the federal level, within which our work on induced seismicity is encompassed. We have a multi-agency research and development strategy with the Environmental Protection Agency and USGS at the Department of Interior. It's on our website. We released the strategy July 21st, and it sets out our priorities areas for research to understand the impacts of unconventional oil and gas development, particularly on air, land, water, induced seismicity. And the issue with induced seismicity that is being observed in certain places across the country, Oklahoma, the Barnett in Texas, the Utica in Ohio, has to do with the produced water that's re-injected. And the re-injection wells are at shallower depths than where oil and gas production actually happens. And so what we're in the process of doing is initiating a suite of research activities, or some of them are being completed and will be released shortly, to actually do monitoring and understand what's actually happening. Because this is an issue that state regulators are actively grappling with. What does the science tell us about reinjection and how it relates to seismicity? And therefore, what actions can be taken to mitigate or reduce those impacts? This is one where a lot of research is being done, both at the federal level and with academic institutions across the country, and will be a priority for us in getting the results out over the next 6 to 12 months to state regulators who are actively grappling with this, because this is something that's very real. When you're trying to shake in your cabinet, you tend to notice it, right? In
And I think
neighborhoods.
you were just in Oklahoma, where they've
Absolutely.
experienced some increased seismicity from production, actually, again, from injection wells, not from production.
Absolutely, and that's where we've observed the seismicity, so that's what the focus is going to be.
So we have good questions, but we have a lot of different panels that are going to answer many of the questions asked. We have about 10 minutes left, and so I want to really focus on the future. And Dan, I want you to start this conversation by kind of how you see the future. And let's take a 10 to 20-year future. What do you think the prospects are for natural gas, sort of in this energy transition that we're making? And again, what are some of the risks that maybe we haven't talked about, but we need to address in order to make that transition?
Well, I think the best way for the environmentalists on the panel to, not that you all are not environmentalists, it used to be that it was a bad thing to be called an environmentalist. Bill, you remember those days pretty well. But when I was in the legislature serving on the Ag Committee, I was referred to as the environmentalist, and it wasn't in a nice way. So forgive me when I make that oversimplification of environmentalists versus others. But I think the best way for the environmental community to be looking at this question is, what is the path forward that brings the cleanest energy to the most people in our world? And in order to do that, you really need to be somewhat agnostic about where that energy comes from. The idea is performance, and it's clean performance. And as I said, I think we all need to be laser focused on the largest challenge of our generation, which is climate change. And in order to do that, we need to be looking at it through the prism that Ken's presentation gave us. We need to be looking at it through the prism of how are we going to solve this problem? Or how are we at least going to set the table so that our children can solve this problem? If it's just going to be focusing on what's the cheapest energy available, then we're not going to make the progress that we need to on this critical issue. So as I look forward, again, I like to try to be optimistic, although my wife says I'm a horrible pessimist. But I like to be optimistic and say, look, there is this huge opportunity here, a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity that we're faced with as a nation with this abundant energy source that can be, if we do it right, a great step in that direction. But we need to be really clear-eyed about it and understand that there are huge risks if we get it wrong.
Hassan, 10 to 20 years looking forward, and maybe even as a part of looking forward, some response to sort of Dan's construct of thinking about this in terms of the greatest number of people to get the cheapest amount of clean energy.
Look, I think, consistent with everything that we've heard today, we believe that gas will continue to play a large role. So gas globally, by 2025, will move to 26% of the energy production worldwide from, I think, 21% 10 years ago. So a huge shift to utilize gas. I think all the way from, as GE, we continue to invest in technologies to help from the point of getting the gas out of the ground to the pipeline network, or to the LNG liquefaction, to the point of consumption on driving power generation or diesel replacement in transportation. I think the future is very promising. It will require a lot of cooperation. It will require cooperation between the producers, the technology providers, the regulators, the communities, and that cooperation is going to extend beyond the U.S. also to get into cooperation like we're seeing with what's happening with the Chinese delegation this week here, that we will also be with tomorrow. So I think the future is great. We just need to continue to drive the advancement and the cooperation with all the different elements.
So Chris, a 20-year picture from an industry perspective, and maybe from your unique industry perspective, because you really have talked about this probably differently than other people inside of industry might, but a 20-year picture for natural gas.
Yeah. So as we've heard from everybody here, the reserves in shale in the U.S. are immense. So today, about 18% of our drilling rigs drills for natural gas. So it's become, 80 plus are drilling for oil. So the next 20 years, that's probably not far from what happens. There's probably a little more gas drilling, but I think with a relatively small number of rigs, we will supply all of U.S. needs for natural gas. We'll see growing export via LNG, And we'll see a significant amount of reshoring of industry in the U.S. Our fertilizer industry left, to go where there's cheap natural gas. That, not just our fertilizer, but fertilizer for others, is all coming. That'll be made in the United States. Petrochemical industry is moving to the United States. So I speak a fair amount in other countries that they want a shale revolution too. When I spoke in England several times, they say, well, even if we don't do it here, can't we just buy your natural gas and therefore we get the benefits of a shale revolution? And let me give a couple numbers that are important to keep in mind. Oil in round numbers, $100 commodity. Costs in round numbers, $10 to move it around the planet. Natural gas, US domestically, is just under $4 for a million British thermal units, but it costs over $5 to move it. So if England's going to buy natural gas from the US, they're not going to have natural gas under $10. So for industrial, for manufacturing, for home heating, for powering diesel trucks and automobiles, having pipeline gas that's either produced in your own country or available pipeline is going to play a huge role in the competitiveness of countries around the world. The US is in a great situation. What the others do is only the future will tell.
So Paula, there's a lot of people who talk about goals to reduce emissions as part of a climate plan, and the President's articulated a climate plan. So part of those goals involve other kinds of clean energy and energy efficiency. So how do you square all that? How do you be aggressive in really trying to deploy added renewables, trying to do as much as we can as a country on energy conservation, and then try and understand oil and gas production in that context? A 20-year sort of vision, if you will.
Right. It's an important one, a very timely one. And unlike Dan, I'm often accused of being Pollyanna. But I know there's very large ponies in here somewhere. Where we are right now, I think the answer to the question stems from acknowledging where we are right now in this era of abundance. And it's an abundant era for us of hydrocarbon resources, for sure. But it's also an era of abundance in renewable energy and energy efficiency. We've made tremendous gains in the past decade in the availability of renewable energy technologies and the cost of them, as well as tremendous gains in efficiency and the deployment of efficiency as a resource. So we have an opportunity here, again, in this era of abundance, to think smartly about all three of those at the same time. I'm an economist. Research shows that when we are faced with abundance, we make better decisions than when we're faced with scarcity. So it's important, to the point Dan made earlier, and extending on the idea of collaboration, that we move beyond the trenches, that we come into what I like to call the radical center. And we acknowledge that we have this tremendously fortunate position in history where we have an incredible abundance of hydrocarbons, efficiency, and renewables. And that we make a plan in this time of abundance where we also have still abundant clean air and clean water and land to make decisions that will serve us well in 2040 and 2050 and serve our children well, rather than waiting until any of those resources are compromised or scarce, because we won't make good decisions then, or we won't face the same decision set. So what I am hopeful that we're able to do is move beyond this idea that we need to be in the trenches and that there's a zero-sum game here among these resources. I was in Oklahoma City yesterday speaking to a large group of operators in the unconventional oil and gas space. And I asked anyone in the room, is there anyone in here who doesn't like clean air and clean land and a hospitable climate, right? Why are we engaged in this sort of false dichotomy of having to choose between those and economic growth? The abundance that we're facing allows us to move beyond that. And I invite everybody to come to the radical center and think about how all those work together. And that's how we get to the vision of the future that the president has set out and the governor is referencing. It's in our hands, and it's time that we come together and do the smart thinking in a time of abundance so that we are not faced with scarcity 20 years out.
So thank you. I think if we listen to even the final comments, there's a great deal of consensus among the four of you about this need to really understand how we develop clean energy. And Dan, I really like your construct, particularly with the 1.3 billion people without electricity delivered into their home. It's been alluded to several times today, but delivered to the largest number of people in the cleanest and the least costly way. It's a great construct, and it's a value prism to operate around. I testified in front of a Senate committee in January, and unfortunately it would be the opposite of this kind of a conversation. And Washington, D.C. would do far better to have this kind of a conversation as opposed to the false dichotomies. So thank you all for being here. Thanks for your responses and sort of the thoughtful dialogue that we were able to have to open up our symposium. God bless you. Thank you.